My name is Heather Wilson, and at 28 years old, I never imagined my own parents would scream, "Go die," as they kicked me out of our family home. All because my golden child sister Megan lost her job at our family business after her own catastrophic mistake. Despite building my successful event planning company from nothing, I was always the invisible daughter. That rainy night, as I packed my bags, Megan smirked and whispered, "Why can't you just disappear already?" Little did they know I was about to reclaim what was legally mine. Before I dive into this painful story, let me know where you're watching from. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever had to stand up to toxic family members who undervalued you. Growing up in Wellesley, an affluent Boston suburb, meant navigating a world of privilege and expectations. Our sprawling colonial home with its manicured lawns and tennis court was the envy of many, but inside those walls, the dynamics were anything but picture perfect. My father, Richard Wilson, was the quintessential self-made man, having built Wilson Property Development from a small office into a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. His stern demeanor and relentless work ethic were legendary in the industry, and he expected nothing less from his family. My mother, Eleanor, was the perfect complement to his ambition, a Radcliffe graduate who traded career aspirations for social climbing. With her perfectly highlighted blonde hair and curated wardrobe, she orchestrated our family's social calendar with military precision. Charity galas, country club meetings, and board positions filled her days, all in service of maintaining the Wilson family image. And then there was Megan, my sister, younger by 2 years, but treated like royalty from day one. From her designer clothes to her luxury car on her 16th birthday, Megan learned early that she could have anything she wanted just by asking. When she struggled in school, tutors appeared overnight. When she wanted to attend an Ivy League university despite mediocre grades, a new library wing was mysteriously funded at Columbia the year she applied. Life for Megan was an endless series of rewards without effort. Megan has artistic sensibilities, my mother would explain when my sister abandoned yet another project halfway through. She's finding her passion. I, on the other hand, was expected to be the responsible one. I maintained a 4.0 GPA throughout school without tutors. I worked summer jobs despite not needing the money. I earned my way into Harvard Business School and graduated with honors. And yet, these accomplishments were treated as the bare minimum, expected rather than celebrated. Of course Heather did well, my father would say dismissively at family gatherings. She's practical. Not everyone can be practical. The contrast was never more apparent than during our family dinners. One particular evening stands out in my memory. I had just secured a major client for my fledgling event planning business, a contract worth 6 figures that would establish my company's reputation. Meanwhile, Megan had managed to attend a full week of her art classes without skipping any. "Let's toast to Megan's commitment to her craft," my father announced, raising his crystal glass of 30-year-old scotch. "Your dedication is inspiring, sweetheart." My mother beamed, adding, "The instructor said her watercolor technique shows real promise." When I mentioned my contract, my father merely nodded. "That's nice, Heather." Speaking of business, Megan, I'm thinking of creating a new creative director position at the company. You're artistic, I could be valuable for our architectural aesthetics. That was how it always went. My achievements were footnotes, while Megan's smallest efforts were celebrated as extraordinary triumphs. What my family didn't know or chose to ignore was that our family home wasn't actually theirs to control. My grandfather, who had adored me and recognized the family's unbalanced dynamics, had quietly put the house in a trust for me when I was born. When I turned 25, legal ownership had transferred to me, though I never pushed the issue out of respect for family harmony. Similarly, I had been managing our family's charitable foundation, the Wilson Community Trust, for 3 years. Under my stewardship, we'd increased our impact by 40% while reducing administrative costs. I'd created partnerships with local businesses, established scholarship programs, and expanded our reach into underserved communities. All of this was accomplished without recognition from my parents, who gladly took credit at donor events while I worked behind the scenes. Eleanor has such a giving heart. I once overheard a major donor tell my father at a gala I had organized. My mother accepted the compliment without mentioning my name or my work. Despite everything, I continued seeking their approval. Each achievement, each milestone became another opportunity to finally earn the recognition I craved. Maybe this time they'd see my worth. Maybe this time I'd be enough. When my event planning company, Precision Events, won a local business award, I invited my family to the ceremony. My father checked his watch throughout the presentation. My mother spent the evening networking with potential clients for the family business. Megan didn't bother to show up at all, texting last minute that she had tickets to a concert she'd forgotten about. I accepted my award alone, smiling for photos while fighting back tears. The owner of another local business approached me afterward. "Your company's growth in 3 years is remarkable, Heather," she said. "You must have an incredible support system." I nodded and thanked her, maintaining the illusion that was the Wilson family image. Perfect, supportive, united. Nothing could have been further from the truth. But still, I persisted. Still, I hoped. Still, I worked twice as hard for half the recognition. Little did I know that the dynamic that had defined my life was about to reach its breaking point. The catalyst for our family's implosion came 6 months ago when my father decided to create a new position at Wilson Property Development specifically for Megan. Despite her art history degree and complete lack of business experience, she was installed as the Director of Client Relations with a corner office and 6-figure salary. "It's about time Megan learned the family business," my father announced over Sunday dinner. "She'll be handling our most prestigious accounts." I nearly choked on my wine. I had an MBA from Harvard and 5 years of proven business success, yet had never been offered so much as an internship at the family company. "Are you sure she's ready for that level of responsibility?" I asked carefully. My mother's expression hardened. "Your sister has excellent people skills, Heather. Not everything is about credentials." Megan flashed a triumphant smile. "Don't worry, sis. I'm a natural at making people happy. Unlike some people who are all about spreadsheets and boring details." The boring details she dismissed were the foundation of business success, but I kept that thought to myself. Instead, I offered to help her transition into the role. "No thanks," Megan replied. "I don't need someone looking over my shoulder. I've got this." Over the following months, I heard troubling whispers from industry contacts. Appointments missed, promises made but not kept, contracts with vague terms. But whenever I tried to broach the subject with my parents, I was shut down immediately. "Focus on your little party planning business, Heather," my father said dismissively. "Leave the real estate development to us." Then came the Hadley project. Westbrook Investments was the largest commercial developer in New England, and partnering with them on the revitalization of the Hadley district would cement Wilson Property Development as a major player nationwide. The initial meetings had gone well, and Westbrook had signed a preliminary agreement worth millions. Megan was assigned as the primary contact. It was her big chance to prove herself. 3 weeks before the final contracts were to be signed, my phone rang at midnight. It was my father, his voice tight with panic. "We need you at the office. Now." I arrived to find my parents and a team of lawyers huddled in the conference room. Documents were spread across the table, and my father's face was ashen. "What happened?" I asked. "Your sister happened," my father snapped. "She's been making unauthorized changes to the Hadley contract, promising impossible timelines, additional features at no cost, guaranteed returns on investment." The Westbrook people were already suspicious, so they sent the revised contract to their legal team. Now they're threatening to pull out entirely and sue us for misrepresentation. My stomach dropped. "Where's Megan?" "She called in sick once this broke," my mother said, dabbing at her eyes with a monogrammed handkerchief. She's very upset. Of course she was. Not because she'd made a catastrophic error, but because she'd been caught. We need you to fix this, my father said, not as a request, but a command. For the next 72 hours, I'd barely slept. I reviewed every document, called in favors from contacts throughout the industry, and personally met with the Westbrook executives. I was honest about the mistakes, but emphasized our company's otherwise spotless reputation. I reworked financial projections, created new timeline scenarios, and proposed a revised agreement that protected both parties' interests. By the end of that marathon effort, I'd managed to salvage part of the deal. Westbrook agreed not to sue and to proceed with a significantly scaled-back version of the project. Instead of a partnership that would have transformed the family business, we were now essentially a subcontractor on a much smaller scale. It's the best I could do, I explained to my parents in the aftermath. The trust was broken. They're giving us a chance to rebuild it, but it will take time. I expected gratitude, or at least acknowledgement of the disaster I'd helped avert. Instead, my father turned to my mother and said, "Call Megan and tell her she can come back now. The worst is over." When Megan returned to the office the next day, she was treated like a returning hero rather than the person who had nearly destroyed the company. She swanned into the conference room where I was still working on damage control documents, her eyes red, but her demeanor victorious. "Daddy says you managed to clean up most of my mess," she said, dropping into a chair across from me. "Good thing we have you to handle the boring parts." I stared at her in disbelief. "Megan, do you understand what almost happened? The company could have been ruined." She shrugged and examined her manicure. "It wasn't ruined, though. And besides, Daddy always has contingency plans." The following week, I was back at my own office when I received a call from Lawrence Pembroke, the CEO of Westbrook Investments. "Heather, I'll be direct. Your work last week impressed me. You turned a complete disaster into something workable, and you did it with integrity." "Thank you, Mr. Pembroke. I appreciate that. Which is why I'm confused about what happened this morning. Your sister contacted our team again, claiming she's been reinstated as our account manager and attempting to renegotiate terms we already finalized with you." My blood ran cold. That's not possible. "She doesn't have the authority." That's what I thought. "But she insisted your father had authorized her to resume control of the project." I promised to clarify the situation and called my father immediately. His secretary put me on hold for 20 minutes before finally connecting us. "Dad, did you authorize Megan to contact Westbrook again?" A long pause. "She needs a chance to redeem herself. They're ready to walk away completely. Everything I salvaged will be lost." Another pause. "Handle it, Heather. Do whatever you need to do to keep them on board. But Megan stays as the official client liaison. It's important for her confidence." I was speechless. Her confidence? What about the company's reputation? What about the millions of dollars at stake? I called Mr. Pembroke back and somehow convinced him to give us one more chance, on the condition that I personally oversee all communications. When I informed my father of this arrangement, he agreed but instructed me to make it look like Megan is in charge for the sake of appearances. For 2 more weeks, I worked around the clock, essentially doing Megan's job while she took the credit. The strain was beginning to show in my own business, which I was neglecting to save my family's. Then came the final straw. Despite my explicit instructions not to deviate from our carefully negotiated terms, Megan took it upon herself to have a casual lunch with Westbrook's project manager. During that lunch, she promised timeline adjustments that were physically impossible to meet. When Mr. Pembroke called me that evening, his voice was ice cold. "Ms. Wilson, our arrangement is terminated, effective immediately. Your company's conduct has been unprofessional and potentially fraudulent. Expect to hear from our attorneys." My desperate attempts to reach him afterward went unanswered. In one lunch, Megan had undone everything and made the situation exponentially worse than before. I drove straight to my parents' home, where I knew they'd be having dinner. I needed to warn them about what had happened and develop an emergency response strategy. As I pulled into the circular driveway, I saw Megan's car already there. My stomach clenched. She had beaten me to them. The heavy wooden front door of the Wilson family home had never seemed so intimidating. As I turned my key in the lock and stepped into the marble-floored foyer, the silence was deafening. Usually, our family dinners were filled with my mother's social observations and my father's business anecdotes, with frequent interjections of praise for whatever minimal effort Megan had made that week. Tonight, the silence told me everything I needed to know. They were waiting for me. I found them in the formal dining room, seated around the antique mahogany table that had hosted countless uncomfortable family moments. Crystal glasses filled with red wine gleamed in the chandelier light. 3 pairs of eyes turned to me as I entered, none of them warm. "There she is," my father said, his voice unnaturally calm. "The saboteur herself." My steps faltered. "What are you talking about?" My mother didn't meet my eyes, staring instead at her perfectly manicured nails. "Megan told us everything, Heather." "How could you?" Megan sat beside them, eyes red and puffy from crying, but I caught the slight upturn at the corner of her mouth, a smirk quickly disguised as a trembling lip. "What exactly did Megan tell you?" I asked, remaining standing rather than taking my usual seat. My father pushed his chair back and stood, his imposing figure looming across the table. "That you deliberately undermined her with Westbrook. That you told them she wasn't authorized to make decisions. That you made her look incompetent so you could swoop in and play the hero." The accusations were so backwards, so completely twisted from reality that for a moment I couldn't form words. "That's not what happened. Westbrook terminated the contract because Megan made promises we can't keep. Promises she wasn't authorized to make. I've been trying to save this deal for weeks." Megan's performance was Academy-worthy. Her voice broke as she said, "See how she blames me? It's always been like this. She's always been jealous that you gave me an opportunity at the company." She dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin. "I was finally finding my place, and she couldn't stand it." "I have my own successful business," I countered. "Why would I sabotage yours?" My mother finally looked up. "Because you've always resented that your father never offered you a position. You've always been competitive with your sister. Always had to be the perfect one, the achiever." "Is that what this is about?" My father's face was turning red. "You've been harboring this resentment all these years, and now you've cost us millions to prove a point?" I felt like I'd stepped into an alternate reality. "I have the email correspondence with Westbrook. I have the meeting notes. I can prove what actually happened." "We've seen the emails," my father said dismissively. "Megan showed us how you've been undermining her authority from day one." My head spun. "What emails?" "I need to see what she showed you." Megan sniffled. "She's just going to make up more excuses. She always does this, makes me look bad to make herself look better." My mother reached over to pat Megan's hand. "It's all right, darling. We understand now." I took a deep breath. "Call Lawrence Pembroke right now. He'll tell you exactly what happened." My father's laugh was harsh. "We already spoke with Lawrence this afternoon. He mentioned your emergency calls trying to blame your sister after the damage was done." The realization hit me like a physical blow. Megan hadn't just manipulated my parents, she'd somehow gotten to Pembroke too. Perhaps through his assistant or someone else at Westbrook. The setup was complete. "This isn't right," I said, my voice shaking. "None of this is true." "Enough." My father's fist came down on the table, making the crystal and china jump. 28 years we've put up with your superiority complex. Your constant need to outshine your sister. Your smug attitude about your self-made success, as if the Wilson name and connections had nothing to do with it. My mother's face was a mask of cold disappointment. "We gave you everything, and this is how you repay us? By trying to destroy your sister's career before it even starts." "She destroyed it herself." I cried out, abandoning my usual composure. "I've been covering for her mistakes for weeks. I put my own business on hold to fix this." My father stalked around the table until he was standing directly in front of me. His voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Get out of this house. What? You heard me. Pack your things and get out. Tonight. I looked to my mother in disbelief, but her face showed no maternal concern, only cold anger. Mom, please. This isn't right. Let me explain. Your father said leave, she replied flatly. I think that's best for everyone right now. Megan didn't even try to hide her smile now. It's for the best, sis. Maybe some time away will help you deal with your issues. I turned back to my father, searching his face for any sign of the dad who had once taught me to ride a bike, who had attended every single one of my graduations with apparent pride. I found no trace of that man. Go die, he suddenly screamed, his face contorted with rage. You're dead to us. After everything we've done for you, you try to destroy this family from within? You're no daughter of mine. The words hit like physical blows. I actually stepped back, bumping into the sideboard behind me. You have 30 minutes to pack whatever you can carry, he continued, his voice now frighteningly controlled. Anything left behind will be thrown out. The locks will be changed tonight. But this is my house, I whispered. Grandfather left it to me. This was met with derisive laughter from all three of them. Your grandfather left everything to me, my father said. Don't try to invent more lies on your way out. In a daze, I walked upstairs to my bedroom. The room I'd grown up in felt suddenly foreign, like I was packing in a stranger's house. I grabbed a suitcase and began mindlessly filling it with essentials, clothes, toiletries, important documents. Footsteps in the doorway made me turn. Megan stood there, watching me with undisguised satisfaction. 30 minutes, she reminded me needlessly. Though honestly, why can't you just disappear already? Nobody wants you here. Nobody ever did. I continued packing in silence, tears streaming down my face. I'll be moving into the master suite once you're gone, she continued. Dad says it's time I took my rightful place in the family. The successful daughter. She emphasized the word successful with malicious glee. When my suitcases were full, I took one last look around the room. A lifetime of memories reduced to 2 bags. As I wheeled them downstairs, my family stood in the foyer, a united front against me. My mother held out her hand. Your house keys and the key to your office at the foundation. I handed them over without argument, too numb to fight anymore. Don't contact us, my father said. Don't try to explain or apologize. It's too late for that. As I loaded my suitcases into my car, rain began to fall, a perfect metaphor for the storm that had just shattered my life. Through the downpour, I could see them watching from the bay window, Megan's arm around our mother's shoulders in a show of support. I got into my car and drove away from the only home I'd ever known, with no idea where I was going and no family left to call. The Marriott hotel room felt sterile and empty as I sat on the edge of the bed, still in my rain-soaked clothes from hours earlier. The shock had worn off, replaced by waves of grief that crashed over me in unstoppable surges. My phone displayed dozens of missed calls from clients and business associates, all needing my attention. But I couldn't focus on anything except the echo of my father's words. Go die. You're dead to us. How had it come to this? I'd spent my entire life trying to be the daughter they wanted, responsible, hardworking, successful. I'd never rebelled, never caused them embarrassment, never asked for the handouts that Megan received as her birthright. And yet, somehow, I was the villain in their story. I scrolled through my phone's photo gallery, looking at pictures from family events over the years. In almost every image, the same pattern emerged: Megan at the center, my parents beaming with pride, and me on the periphery, half smiling, always slightly out of focus. Even in documented memories, I was an afterthought. Sometime around 3 a.m., exhaustion finally overcame misery, and I fell into a restless sleep. When morning light filtered through the hotel curtains, something had shifted inside me. The devastation remained, but alongside it was something new: clarity. For 20 years, I had been complicit in my own mistreatment. I had accepted the role of invisible daughter of perpetual second place. I had enabled their behavior by never challenging it, by always being available to clean up messes, by silently accepting that Megan's needs and desires would always supersede mine. It was time for that to end. After a shower and room service coffee, I made a call to someone I hadn't spoken to in years, my grandfather's attorney, Arthur Kendrick. "Heather Wilson," he said warmly when his secretary put me through. "It's been too long. What can I do for you?" "I need clarity on my grandfather's will," I said. "Specifically regarding the family home and any other assets he may have left to me." There was a pause on the line. "Your parents never told you, did they?" A chill ran down my spine. "Told me what?" "Heather, I think we should meet in person. How quickly can you get to my office?" 2 hours later, I sat across from Arthur in his downtown Boston office as he pulled file after file from a large accordion folder. My grandfather, Malcolm Wilson, had been my father's father and the original founder of what became Wilson Property Development. He had died when I was 23, 5 years ago. "Your grandfather was concerned about the way your parents favored your sister," Arthur explained, adjusting his reading glasses. "He saw how hard you worked and how little recognition you received. He was also concerned about the direction your father was taking the company, focusing on profit at the expense of the ethical standards Malcolm had established." My throat tightened. I'd always felt a special connection with my grandfather, but I had no idea he'd seen so clearly what was happening in our family. When he revised his will 2 years before his death, he made some significant changes, Arthur continued. The family home was placed in a trust that transferred to your name on your 25th birthday. I stared at him. "The house is mine? Legally?" "Has been for 3 years, he confirmed. Your parents were informed of this provision. They were allowed to continue living there rent-free, but ownership transferred to you." "I assumed they'd told you." "They hadn't. They continued acting as though they owned the property, making decisions about renovations, and even hosting a charity auction there last year without consulting me." "There's more," Arthur said, sliding another document across the desk. "Your grandfather left you 40% of the shares in Wilson Property Development. Another 15% went into the charitable foundation, which he designated you as director of upon turning 25. Your father retains 30%, and various minor shareholders hold the rest." The implications hit me like a thunderbolt. "I have controlling interest in the company." Arthur nodded. "And the foundation. Your grandfather believed you would honor his original vision for both." My mind reeled with this new information. All this time, I'd been legally entitled to make decisions about the very company that had refused to hire me. The house I'd been evicted from was actually mine. "Why didn't you contact me when I turned 25? I asked. Arthur looked uncomfortable. "I did send official notification. Your father called afterward and assured me he would handle the transition within the family. He said you weren't interested in taking an active role yet and preferred him to continue managing day-to-day operations while you focused on your own business ventures." Another lie. I had never received any notification, and my father had certainly never mentioned any of this to me. "I need copies of everything," I said, a plan already forming in my mind. "Of course. And Heather," Arthur hesitated, "there's a letter your grandfather left for you as well. He asked that I give it to you when you came asking about the will." The sealed envelope he handed me bore my name in my grandfather's distinctive handwriting. I tucked it into my bag to read privately later. For the next week, I immersed myself in research and planning. I met with financial advisors, business consultants, and estate attorneys. I reviewed the company's performance over the past 3 years and discovered troubling patterns: declining ethical standards, cutting corners on building materials, questionable labor practices. The Wilson Community Trust had also been mismanaged, with funds diverted to vanity projects and social events rather than the community programs my grandfather had intended to support. I rented a small apartment and set up a temporary office there. My own business, Precision Events, continued to run smoothly thanks to my exceptional staff, though I made time for key client meetings and decisions. In quiet moments, I grieved for the family I thought I had, or perhaps for the family I had always wished for but never truly had. After 2 weeks of intensive preparation, I was ready to reclaim what was legally mine. I had the evidence of mismanagement, the legal documents asserting my ownership, and a detailed plan for restructuring both the company and the foundation to restore my grandfather's vision. The final piece fell into place when I learned through industry contacts that my father was planning to announce Megan's appointment as the new executive vice president of client relations at the company's quarterly board meeting. Despite the Westbrook disaster, he was doubling down on positioning her as his eventual successor. It was time to act. The process of legally asserting my ownership rights was surprisingly straightforward with Arthur Kendrick's guidance. As the documents were already in place, it was merely a matter of filing the appropriate paperwork and notifying the relevant parties. I did this quietly, without fanfare, allowing the mechanics of corporate law to work in the background while I focused on rebuilding my life. My new apartment became a sanctuary, a place where, for the first time, every decision was truly mine. I chose a modern one-bedroom in Cambridge, close enough to Boston for business, but removed from my parents' social circles. The furnishings were minimal and calming, nothing like the ornate antiques and status symbols that filled my family's home. For the first time, I was creating a space that reflected who I really was, not who I was expected to be. Precision Events continued to thrive despite subtle attempts at sabotage from my family. Several long-standing clients suddenly canceled contracts, citing vague concerns about reliability, concerns that mysteriously arose after conversations with my mother at her social clubs. Industry partners who had worked closely with the Wilson family business became suddenly unavailable. Venues I had booked months in advance called with apologetic voices to explain that they had been double-booked and would need to cancel my events. Each obstacle strengthened my resolve. For every client who left, I secured 2 new ones. I leveraged my Harvard network to find new venues. I built partnerships with event professionals who operated outside my parents' sphere of influence. By the end of the month, Precision Events was stronger than ever, with a waiting list of clients attracted by our growing reputation for excellence and integrity. More importantly, I was building real connections for the first time in my life. Without the shadow of my family's expectations, I found myself forming genuine friendships with colleagues and clients. Amanda Thompson, a local caterer who frequently worked my events, became a trusted confidant. Jesse Reynolds, a photographer I'd collaborated with for years, invited me to join a weekly hiking group where I met people who knew nothing about the Wilson name or fortune. "You seem different lately," Amanda remarked one evening as we shared a bottle of wine after a successful corporate gala. "More relaxed, more you." I considered this. "I think I'm finally figuring out who me actually is." "Well, I like her," Amanda said, raising her glass in a toast. "She's pretty awesome." These moments of authentic connection stood in stark contrast to the shallow relationships that had dominated my previous life, connections based on family name, social standing, and mutual benefit rather than genuine affinity or respect. Meanwhile, through carefully cultivated sources, I monitored the situation at Wilson Property Development and the family home. My parents had apparently told their social circle that I was taking some time away to focus on personal growth, a euphemism that suggested a mental breakdown or substance abuse problem without explicitly saying so. Megan had indeed moved into the master bedroom suite of the house, symbolic of her ascension as the favored child. The company was struggling in the aftermath of the Westbrook debacle. 3 other major clients had pulled their projects, concerned about the rumors of misrepresentation and poor management. Rather than addressing these fundamental issues, my father had doubled down on aggressive expansion plans, taking out substantial loans to acquire properties that industry experts considered overvalued. Most troubling were the reports I received about the Wilson Community Trust. Funds earmarked for educational scholarships had been redirected to sponsor a gala honoring my father's commitment to the community. A planned housing initiative for low-income families had been indefinitely postponed, while the foundation's staff enjoyed lavish retreats at luxury resorts for strategic planning. Throughout this period of information gathering, I received numerous texts and voicemails from my mother. They ranged from guilt-inducing, "How could you disappear and worry us like this?" to threatening, "Your father is considering legal action if you continue this childish behavior," to conciliatory, "Let's meet for lunch, just us girls, and sort this out." I responded to none of them. As the quarterly board meeting for Wilson Property Development approached, I finalized the last details of my plan. The legal transfers were complete. The documentation was prepared. All that remained was to inform my family of their new reality. Rather than confronting them at the board meeting, where my father would have the home field advantage surrounded by his loyal executives, I opted for a more intimate setting. A setting where the personal and the professional had always blurred in our family. Sunday dinner. I texted my mother, "I've had time to reflect. I'd like to come to dinner this Sunday to talk things through." Her response was immediate. 6 o'clock. "Your father and I are relieved you've come to your senses." I didn't bother to correct her assumption. In her world, coming to my senses meant accepting their version of reality and resuming my role as the compliant, invisible daughter. She had no idea what was actually coming. The night before the dinner, I sat alone in my apartment and finally opened my grandfather's letter. His familiar handwriting brought tears to my eyes. "My dearest Heather," it began. "If you're reading this, you've finally discovered what I've tried to provide for you. I've watched you grow into an extraordinary woman, intelligent, determined, and kind in ways your parents never encouraged or perhaps even noticed. I've also watched with heartache as you've been overshadowed and undervalued in a family that should have been your strongest support. The assets I've left to you are not merely financial inheritance. They are tools to help you claim your rightful place and to restore the values that were once the foundation of our family and business. Use them wisely, not for revenge, but for restoration. Sometimes the greatest act of love is establishing boundaries that protect your own worth. Remember that true family is defined by love and respect, not merely by blood. Find people who recognize your light and help it shine brighter. I have every confidence in the woman you are becoming and the difference you will make in this world. I am prouder of you than you will ever know. With endless love and faith in you. Grandfather." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Even from beyond the grave, my grandfather had given me what my parents never had, unconditional belief in my worth and capabilities. His words settled something inside me, replacing uncertainty with conviction. This wasn't about revenge. It was about justice for myself, for the company employees who deserved ethical leadership, and for the communities that should benefit from the Foundation's work. It was about honoring my grandfather's legacy and vision. Sunday evening arrived. I dressed carefully in a simple black sheath dress with minimal jewelry, professional, confident, unassailable. In my briefcase were the documents that would change everything. As I drove toward the family home, my home, legally I felt remarkably calm. The time for seeking approval was over. The time for truth had arrived. The familiar crunch of gravel under my tires as I pulled into the circular driveway sent an unexpected wave of emotion through me. This had been home for 28 years, yet I now felt like an intruder approaching enemy territory. I checked my appearance one last time in the rearview mirror, not out of vanity, but to ensure I projected the confidence I needed to maintain. The woman who stared back at me looked different somehow. Stronger. More centered. I rang the doorbell rather than using my key, as small acknowledgement that the dynamics had changed. My mother opened the door, her surprise at this formality quickly masked behind a practiced social smile. "Heather, darling. You didn't need to ring the bell." Her voice carried the artificial warmth she typically reserved for fair-weather friends and useful social connections. The house smelled of pot roast and fresh flowers, the familiar Sunday dinner combination that had defined my childhood. In the dining room, the table was set with the Wedgwood china and sterling silver flatware reserved for special occasions. My father stood by the fireplace nursing a scotch, while Megan lounged in a chair scrolling through her phone. "Well, well. The prodigal daughter returns," my father said, not bothering to hide his sarcasm. He didn't move to greet me. Megan glanced up briefly. "We've already eaten the appetizers. You're late." I wasn't late. I was precisely on time, but punctuality had always been considered early in the Wilson household, where arriving 15 minutes after the stated time was the expected norm of our social class. "Thank you for having me," I said simply, taking a seat at the table. An awkward silence followed as my mother served the meal. I noticed she'd prepared all my father's favorites: roast beef with Yorkshire pudding, roasted rosemary potatoes, and glazed carrots. A deliberate choice to keep him in good spirits for what they assumed would be my apology tour. "So," my father finally said, after several minutes of uncomfortable small talk about the weather and local news, "I assume you've had time to reflect on your behavior and are ready to make amends." I took a small sip of water. "I have indeed had time to reflect. On many things." My mother nodded encouragingly. "That's good, dear. The first step is acknowledging when we've been in the wrong." Megan smirked behind her wine glass. "Admitting you have a problem is so brave, sis." I met each of their gazes calmly, allowing the moment to stretch until my father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Before we get to that," I said, "Megan, I believe you had some news to share?" My sister's face lit up at the chance to be the center of attention again. "Actually, yes. Daddy's announcing my promotion to Executive Vice President of Client Relations at tomorrow's board meeting." She flashed her left hand, where an enormous diamond sparkled. "And Bradley Montgomery proposed last weekend. We're thinking a spring wedding at the Fairmont." Bradley Montgomery was the son of one of my father's golf buddies, known primarily for spending his trust fund and cycling through relationships. They'd been dating for approximately 3 weeks. "Congratulations," I said evenly. My mother beamed. "We're thinking of renovating the East Wing guest rooms into a private suite for them until they find the perfect home. And your father is setting up a very generous wedding fund." Speaking of generosity, my father interjected, refilling his scotch, "We've decided to transfer some additional assets to Megan in light of her new responsibilities and personal milestone. The lake house in Vermont and the condo in Beacon Hill. It's time she had property of her own to manage." The lake house had been my favorite place as a child. The condo had been purchased as an investment property using funds from the foundation, a legally questionable move I had documented in my research. "How interesting," I replied, reaching for my briefcase beside my chair. "That actually relates to what I wanted to discuss tonight." I withdrew a thick manila envelope and placed it precisely in the center of the dining table between the crystal candelabras. For a moment, no one moved to touch it. "What's this?" my father finally asked, annoyance edging his voice. "Information that will be relevant to your plans," I said. "Please take a look." My mother glanced nervously at my father, who reached for the envelope with visible reluctance. He opened it and began scanning the first document. His face, normally controlled in even the most stressful business situations, suddenly drained of color. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. "The trust documents for the family home," I replied calmly. "As you can see, ownership transferred to me 3 years ago upon my 25th birthday, as stipulated in grandfather's will." My mother snatched the papers from him. "This can't be right. Malcolm left everything to Richard." "Everything." "Not everything," I said, nodding toward the additional documents in the envelope. "There's more." My father pulled out the next set of papers, his hands now visibly shaking. His eyes widened as he read. 40%, he whispered hoarsely. "This says you own 40% of the company shares." Megan lunged across the table. "Let me see that." She grabbed the documents, scanning them frantically. "This has to be fake. Some kind of forgery." It's all legally verified, I said. As are the documents establishing me as director of the Wilson Community Trust, with controlling interest there as well. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the hallway seemed to have paused in shock. My father was the first to recover, his face flushing with rage. You've known this for how long? Been plotting behind our backs? This is why you've been missing for weeks preparing this. This coup. I only discovered these facts recently, I replied truthfully, after you kicked me out of my own house and told me to go die. My mother flinched at the reminder of their words that night. If this is some kind of revenge scheme, my father began. It's not about revenge, I interrupted. It's about accountability. The final documents in that envelope are the results of the audit I commissioned on both the company and the foundation. Misappropriation of foundation funds. Building code violations that were covered up rather than addressed. Tax discrepancies. Ethical breaches that could result in criminal charges if reported to the appropriate authorities. Megan's face had gone from shocked to calculating. So, what do you want? Money? Your own executive position? Name your price for keeping quiet. The question revealed so much about how my sister's mind worked. Everything was transactional. Everything and everyone had a price. What I want, I said carefully, is for things to be run properly. Ethically. The way grandfather intended. My father's laugh was harsh. So you'll blackmail your own family? Threaten to destroy everything we've built unless we give you control. I already have control, I reminded him gently. Legally. I don't need to threaten anything. I'm informing you of changes that will begin tomorrow. You wouldn't dare, my mother whispered. The scandal would affect you too. The Wilson name would be ruined. I'm prepared to do whatever is necessary to restore integrity to grandfather's legacy, I said. Including rebranding if needed. My father's face contorted with rage. After everything we've done for you. The privileged upbringing. The connections that made your little event business possible. The constant dismissal of my achievements? I finished for him. The blatant favoritism toward Megan? The exploitation of my work ethic without recognition? Those things. This is ridiculous, Megan spat. You're just jealous because I'm getting married and you can't even keep a boyfriend. Because Daddy trusts me with the company while you're stuck planning birthday parties. I remained calm. Effective immediately, I am exercising my rights as majority shareholder and property owner. The house will be vacated within 30 days. The company leadership will be restructured, beginning with the board meeting tomorrow. You can't be serious, my mother gasped. Completely serious, I confirmed. You have 30 minutes to pack essential items you'll need for the next few days. After that, security will arrive to change the locks and begin monitoring the property to ensure nothing of value is removed before the formal inventory is completed. My father slammed his fist on the table, sending crystal and china rattling. This is my house. My company. You will not take what I've built. What grandfather built, I corrected. And what you've been systematically dismantling through mismanagement and ethical shortcuts. I stood, gathering the scattered documents and returning them to my briefcase. 30 minutes. I'll wait in my car. Please, my mother said, her social mask cracking to reveal genuine fear beneath. We can discuss this reasonably. Like a family. We stopped being a family the night you threw me out in the rain and told me to go die, I replied, surprised by how little emotion I felt saying these words. Now you have 29 minutes. As I turned to leave, Megan's composure finally shattered. You can't do this. Where are we supposed to go? What about my wedding? What about my promotion? I paused at the doorway, looking back at the three people who had shaped my life with their conditional love and constant judgment. You're intelligent people with considerable resources, I said. I'm sure you'll figure something out. After all, isn't that what you always told me to do? The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of activity and emotion. True to my word, I restructured the leadership of Wilson Property Development, bringing in respected industry veterans with strong ethical track records. I renamed it Cornerstone Development, honoring my grandfather's original vision of building on solid foundations, both literally and figuratively. The Wilson Community Trust became the New Horizons Foundation, with a renewed focus on education, affordable housing, and community development in underserved neighborhoods. I appointed a diverse board of directors with experience in nonprofit management and community organizing, ensuring that funds would be allocated based on genuine need rather than social connections. As for the family home, I ultimately decided to sell it. Despite its legal ownership, the house held too many painful memories to ever feel truly like home again. The proceeds went into an educational trust for disadvantaged students, the first real step in transforming generational pain into something positive. Throughout this period of transition, I experienced a complex mixture of emotions. There was satisfaction in seeing justice served, certainly. But there was also profound grief for the family relationships I had lost, or perhaps more accurately, for the relationships I had always wanted but never truly had. Some nights I would wake up at 3 a.m., wondering if I had gone too far, been too harsh. Other mornings I would feel a lightness I hadn't experienced since childhood, the freedom of no longer contorting myself to earn approval that would never come. My parents and Megan didn't go quietly into their new reality. There were legal challenges, of course, all of which failed given the ironclad nature of my grandfather's estate planning. There were attempts to turn our social circle against me with whispered rumors about mental instability and family betrayal. Most painfully, there was a scathing personal account in Boston Magazine, clearly orchestrated by my mother, portraying me as a vengeful daughter who had destroyed a loving family out of jealousy and ambition. I weathered these storms by focusing on building something better than what I had torn down. Cornerstone Development began winning accolades for its innovative approach to sustainable urban development. New Horizons Foundation grants were making tangible differences in communities throughout New England. And Precision Events continued to thrive, expanding into corporate consultation beyond just event planning. 6 months after the confrontation, I received a text from Megan. Her engagement had ended. Apparently, Bradley had been more interested in the Wilson fortune than in Megan herself. She was living in a modest apartment in Somerville and working as an assistant at a small gallery. Her message was both hostile and pleading. Happy now that you've ruined everything? At least help me get a better apartment. This place is beneath anyone with our background. I didn't respond, but I did ask a trusted business contact to offer her a legitimate position at their marketing firm. No special treatment, standard entry-level salary. She declined, offended by the suggestion that she should start at the bottom like everyone else. A month later, my father reached out through his attorney, offering a compromise that would essentially restore the previous arrangement, but with me receiving formal recognition of my ownership. The request came with not a hint of apology or acknowledgement of past wrongs. I declined through my own attorney, suggesting that he focus on rebuilding his own life rather than trying to reclaim control of mine. My mother was the last to contact me, nearly a year after that fateful dinner. We met at a neutral location, a quiet cafe in Cambridge, far from our usual social haunts. She looked older, the perfect highlights now showing gray roots, the designer clothes replaced by off-the-rack business casual. She had taken a job as an event coordinator at a local university, her first paid employment in 30 years. "You look well," she said after an uncomfortable silence. "The business is thriving from what I hear." I nodded. "It is. How are you adapting?" She sighed, stirring her untouched tea. "It's been educational. Your father and I are separated. The divorce will be finalized next month." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, and meant it. Despite everything, I had never wished for their marriage to end. "Are you?" she asked, a flash of the old bitterness surfacing. "Isn't this what you wanted? All of us humbled and miserable while you succeed." "No," I replied simply. "What I wanted was to be valued, to be seen, to be treated with the same love and respect Megan received automatically." What I wanted was a family that built each other up instead of tearing each other down. Something in my words seemed to reach her. For perhaps the first time in my life, I saw my mother really look at me not as an extension of herself or a supporting character in the family narrative, but as an independent person with my own valid experiences. "I don't know if I know how to be the mother you needed," she admitted quietly. I'm not sure I ever did. It wasn't an apology, but it was more honest than anything she had ever said to me before. It was a start. The road to healing wasn't quick or straightforward. There were setbacks and difficult conversations. But slowly, tentative bridges began to form. My father eventually acknowledged, in his own way, that his treatment of me had been unfair. Megan and I established a distant but civil relationship after she finally sought therapy and began to recognize her own patterns of manipulative behavior. None of these relationships would ever be what I had longed for as a child. But they were becoming something new, something based on reality rather than roles, on earned respect rather than obligation. Meanwhile, I was building a chosen family of friends and colleagues who appreciated me for exactly who I was. Amanda from the catering company became my business partner when we merged our companies to offer comprehensive event services. Jesse the photographer introduced me to his brother Nathan, who eventually became more than just a hiking companion. My world expanded beyond the narrow confines of Boston high society to include people from diverse backgrounds and perspectives. 2 years after the night I was thrown out in the rain, I stood on the rooftop deck of Cornerstone's newest mixed-income housing development, watching the sunset over the city's skyline. The building included affordable units for working families, green spaces, and community facilities, exactly the kind of project my grandfather would have championed. As I traced my fingers over the cornerstone bearing his name, I felt a sense of peace that had been absent for most of my life. By reclaiming my legal inheritance, I had discovered something far more valuable: my own worth, independent of anyone else's validation. The journey hadn't been about revenge after all, but about restoration of my grandfather's values, of ethical business practices, of my own self-worth. The tables had turned, yes, but not merely to inflict the same pain I had experienced. They had turned to create a new pattern, a better legacy. Have you ever had to make difficult decisions to protect yourself from toxic family dynamics? What boundaries have you set to preserve your own well-being? Share your experiences in the comments below. Remember that standing up for yourself isn't selfish, it's an act of self-preservation that allows you to create something positive from painful experiences. If my story resonated with you, please like, subscribe, and share with someone who might need to hear that they deserve better. Thank you for listening, and remember, family is defined by love and respect, not just by blood.